I'm Emily Leibin, and today I'll be talking about my research on the homes designed by the late architect Elroy Weber. My belief is that Weber and his designs have been overlooked by the canon of modern architecture and deserve a closer examination. My thesis, Rediscovering Elroy Weber's Modern Homes, provides an alternative view of historic architecture in the Northeast and brings to light a variation of modern design that's been forgotten over time. Weber's designs first caught my attention when I was growing up in the Connecticut town of West Hartford. Here, the Kaufman House stood out from the traditional colonial landscape and seemed like the only modern home of its kind. Once I began my investigation, I was surprised to find that Weber was pretty much unknown, but had designed dozens of homes across the Northeast. This gorgeous image is the Bachelor's Beach House, which was built on the coast of Maine. In the 1950s and 60s, Weber's bespoke home designs were in popular demand and served as icons of glamour and sophistication for an elite class of suburban intellectuals. His work received an enormous amount of appreciation from the press at the time and regularly appeared before a national audience in publications like the New York Times, House Beautiful, and Architectural Record. So today, in this talk, I'll first explain the experiences that formed Weber's philosophies on design, and then discuss several examples that define his divergent take on the modern style. What made Weber such a success was his radical approach to design and politics. He formed strong opinions when he began studying at Harvard in the early 1920s, and preferred the modern style to the Beaux-Arts curriculum that was taught at that school. It would be about 15 more years before the new style was adopted in the curriculum there, so he had to pursue the movement on his own. He went to Paris in the summer of 1929 and was the first American to work in Le Corbusier's atelier, where he was exposed to forward-thinking projects like this. Weber later wrote that he, quote, returned supercharged with the modern movement, and he went to finish his studies at MIT. There, he designed this thesis project in the modern style, which was very, very unusual for the time. And as a basis of comparison, these are three student theses from the same year. So it's very different. After he graduated, he went to work in New York, and he became involved with the New York Intellectuals, which is a group of like-minded secular Jewish artists and writers who focus their discourse on literary criticism, art, and the support of communism. This is the first issue of the literary journal Partisan Review. Weber illustrated the cover with the logo of the John Reed Club, which was a communist group that the publication was affiliated with. In the 1930s, he began his own practice designing mostly interiors, and often collaborated with artists and photographers from this community. He also began writing and established himself as an outspoken critic and supporter of modern architecture. In 1931, he won the praise of Frank Lloyd Wright, an architect that he admired, who had read a series of articles that Weber wrote and began corresponding with him. The same year, Weber was also involved in one of the most rebellious little exhibitions of the century, the Rejected Architects Show. It was like an impromptu salon de refusés. It was set up by 9 young architects whose designs had been declined from the annual Architecture League's exhibition on the grounds that they were too modern. This is the brochure with the names of the participating architects, and it also has a manifesto-like definition of modern architecture that was authored by these 9 architects. The event served as an inspiration to Weber's colleague from Harvard, Philip Johnson, who, in reference to the trend, coined the term international style and put together an exhibit by the same name at the Museum of Modern Art just a few months later. After working in New York City for a number of years, Weber began designing more and more homes in the suburb of Hartford, and in 1951, he moved his practice back to his hometown of Springfield, Massachusetts, to embark on the most popular and prolific period of his career. Over the course of the next decade, he designed many homes in the Connecticut Valley region, which extends from Hartford north to Springfield and Longmeadow. And it's an area that's generally known for its colonial architecture, not modern homes. Here, he designed many homes in isolation from the other architects in neighboring cities. He expanded on his experiences with early modernism and radical philosophies, and he began to incorporate natural materials and some surprising nostalgic elements from the Victorian era. This mix evolved over the years from a desire to incorporate nature in his work to a bold graphic statement with overtones of the postmodern. So, in his work, there's three main themes that evolved over the course of the 1950s, and I'm calling them hidden nature, transitions, and the Victorian stripe. In this first category, hidden nature, Weber developed his own language of functional exteriors that were subversive and refined. They often turned their back on the street and with large windowless expanses of wall. They were unlike any of the other homes in the area and were most often hidden behind a dense landscape that he intended as a barrier between the home and the surrounding neighborhood. The privacy that Weber created with his landscapes provided the illusion that his homes were not part of the suburban grid. This eliminated one of the aspects that made the glass walls of modern architecture hard for many people to embrace. He made his homeowners feel less exposed. The second theme in his homes, transitions, deals with the borders between nature and his designs. This was employed mainly in spaces like doorways and skylights, where natural elements meet his architecture and enter the home. Here, Weber used trellises to manipulate space and light, which, in the entrance to the Leffen Kaufmann house as pictured, has the effect of creating a dark tunnel striped with bursts of sunlight surrounded by plants. These are wonderful and unusual interiors, and they're quite a bit different from what I had expected of a modern home. They're dark, richly textured spaces, and they set Weber's designs apart from the trend that favored white walls and the minimal use of glass, steel, and concrete. Here, he used stone, plants, trellises, and massive indoor skylights, with the goal of blurring the boundaries of interior and exterior space. The result was patterns of light that striped across a dramatic mix of bold colors and earthy materials. The last evolution of Weber's work, the Victorian stripe, developed just before he disappeared from public view in the 1960s. It's an interpretation of his previous ideas in a new way. Here at the Curzon House, he created a bold graphic take on Victorian stripes. Hidden behind this, the earthy kind of exteriors that he created. In the mudroom pictured on the right, they're used like the stripes on a Victorian bathing suit or children's clothes, as a functional, cheerful, and energetic way to defend from visual impurity created by dirt. In the kitchen, he applied massive graphic stripes of black and white linoleum that reflected off of shiny surfaces and made their way down hallways into different parts of the house. Stripes were used to transition from one space to another in a way that was similar to his previous use of trellises and light. And lastly, in the guest bathroom, Weber employed his new vocabulary of stripes in pink, gray, and white, surrounding a floating marble sink with composition book-like speckles. The incorporation of sleek, white-based stone and walls over his previous preference for dark, earthy materials references trends in modernism that he had previously resisted. He takes it a step further by incorporating a cropped surrealist photograph from Botticelli's The Birth of Venus and a futuristic recessed mirror. This combination seems to push into the realm of referential design and feel a bit like a foreshadowing of the Memphis and postmodern movements to come. In conclusion, my research of Elroy Weber and his modern home designs provides an alternative example of historic architectural trends. It also presents an untold story of modernism that existed in parallel with the canon, and I think is worthy of a closer look. Thank you.
Hi. Well, I was entirely ignorant of him, so I'm happy to have that addition to the canon. How do you, having spent so much time thinking about him and looking at his work in the context of the great modernist heyday in the 20th century, how does he compare? Is his lack of renown today commensurate with his talent, or did he get screwed by history, do you think?
Well, I think he almost chose to opt out of history when he left New York. And he had existed on the fringes and, based on his social inclinations, it was really a personal choice. And, I think...
His social inclinations being that he was the anti-Philip Johnson, kind of? I mean, he didn't like sort of being a social person?
Yeah, I mean, he was very social, I suppose, at the... Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. He was very social at the time, but indeed in the same circles, but with opposing views.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. I mean, and I'm glad you mentioned Philip Johnson, because before you did, I was thinking, boy, he is, it's like if there were a novel about him and Philip Johnson, they would be good sort of, counterpoints. And again, the left-wing Jewish in the 1930s, both from Harvard, both modernists, versus the fascist sympathizer, non-Jew, Philip Johnson.
Absolutely, and their opposing criticism appeared in a lot of the same publications, like the New York Times and the Hound and Horn, which was founded by a similar colleague of theirs.
I found the most surprising and, in a way, interesting thing, in addition to just learning about his existence, the Victorian stripe in 1960. It's so interesting. I wondered, however, why you call it Victorian rather than proto-super graphics or something.
It definitely has a very kind of pop feeling to it, but it's a theme that carried on from his work in his earliest days, and he was very fond of his kind of post-Victorian youth, and he had been incorporating that type of motif for the course of his career.
Really? So there were distinct sources in his youth, consciously?
Well, yeah, he was raised in a Victorian home, and then kind of in his earliest work in the 30s, you kind of see these stripes in a minimal way, but then they kind of explode in that very pop way by the 60s.
Great. Thanks, that was great.
Thank you.